The quiet streets of Sacramento, California, masked a darkness few could have imagined. This serene suburban neighborhood, with its tree-lined streets and well-kept lawns, seemed like the perfect place to raise a family. But behind the closed doors of one seemingly ordinary home, a tragedy of unimaginable proportions was about to unfold. The house, with its white picket fence and blooming garden, gave no hint of the horror that lay within. It was a place where neighbors exchanged pleasantries and children played without a care in the world. The news spread like wildfire, and soon, the entire neighborhood was engulfed in disbelief and sorrow. People gathered in small groups, whispering and speculating about the unimaginable events that had transpired. At the center of this nightmare was Ka Yang, a young mother, and her 2-month-old daughter, Mirabelle. Ka Yang was known to her neighbors as a quiet and reserved woman, always seen doting on her infant daughter. The year was 2011. In this small corner of Sacramento, time seemed to stand still as the community grappled with the horror that had unfolded. Spring had arrived, bringing with it the promise of new life and fresh beginnings. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and the trees were adorned with vibrant blossoms. But for little Mirabelle, spring's promise would never be fulfilled. Her life, so full of potential and promise, was tragically cut short. Instead, her young life ended in the cold, sterile steel of a microwave oven. The very thought of such an act was enough to send shivers down the spine of anyone who heard it. The details, as they emerged, were too horrific to comprehend. The police and forensic teams worked tirelessly to piece together the events that led to this tragedy. How could a mother, entrusted with the care and well-being of her own flesh and blood, commit such an unspeakable act? The question haunted everyone who heard the story. As investigators delved deeper, they uncovered a web of conflicting stories and a mother's desperate attempts to conceal the truth. The detectives worked meticulously, determined to uncover the full story. This case defied explanation, challenging the very core of human compassion and understanding. The community was left to grapple with unanswerable questions, each person reflecting on the fragility of life and the depths of human despair. This is the story of Ka Yang and the tragic death of baby Mirabelle. It is a story that will forever be etched in the annals of Sacramento's history, a grim reminder of the unimaginable horrors that can lurk behind closed doors. The first responders arrived at the Yang residence, their sirens piercing the quiet suburban night. The scene was one of utter chaos and despair. The air was thick with tension, and the cries of a distraught mother echoed through the house. Ka Yang, frantic and distraught, claimed her baby was dead. She pointed towards the living room. The lifeless form of her infant daughter lay still and cold near a space heater. She claimed the baby had gotten too close to the heater, suffering fatal burns. But something wasn't right. The baby's injuries didn't match the mother's story. The burns were too severe and unusual. Experienced paramedics noted the unusual nature of the burns. They were deeper, more pervasive. These were not typical contact burns. The patterns were irregular, the intensity inconsistent. The burns covered nearly 80% of the infant's body, a horrifying sight. Strangely, the baby's clothes and hair remained untouched by fire. This raised more questions. The untouched clothes and hair made them question the mother's story even more. A chilling realization began to dawn. The burns were not caused by a space heater. The patterns, intensity, and depth pointed to a single horrifying possibility: microwave radiation. The realization was almost too much to bear, but the evidence was undeniable. A thorough examination confirmed their worst fears. The burns were consistent with microwave radiation. Hidden within the microwave, investigators found a baby's pacifier, key to understanding the true horror. Baby Mirabelle had been deliberately placed inside that microwave, left to suffer an unimaginable death. The realization was a heavy burden for the first responders and investigators to bear. The horror of the situation was almost too much to comprehend, but the evidence was clear. The investigation would continue, but the truth was already painfully evident. Ka Yang stood in the courtroom, the weight of her actions pressing down. The media frenzy had drawn a crowd, eager for the chilling details of her defense. Yang's defense was as shocking as the crime. She claimed no memory of the incident, attributing it to a violent epileptic seizure. Her voice wavered as she described being trapped in a nightmare, unable to control her actions. Yang argued she had undiagnosed epilepsy, with fainting spells and blackouts as ominous signs. On that fateful day, a seizure struck while she was with her baby, leaving her unconscious and unaware. She painted a vivid picture of a normal day turned tragic. Waking up to find her child lifeless, Yang's horror was palpable. She claimed to have found the baby near a space heater, already dead. Her defense team presented medical records and testimonies, depicting Yang as a loving mother struck by a debilitating condition. They argued her actions were those of a victim, not a killer. The defense urged the jury to see beyond the horror, to consider Yang's devotion to her child. They painted a picture of a mother caught in a medical crisis, not a cold-blooded murderer. The defense attorney's final plea was emotional, asking for compassion and understanding. He reminded the jury that justice also meant mercy. But Yang's story began to unravel under scrutiny. The prosecution highlighted inconsistencies and the lack of medical evidence. Forensic experts testified that the baby's injuries were not consistent with an accidental fall. The prosecution argued it was a deliberate act, not a medical mishap. The courtroom was tense as the jury struggled to discern the truth from the tangled web of testimonies and evidence.